Greetings, Anonymous Party members, and thank you for watching. If this is your first video, I recommend first watching one of the introduction videos that are available on the Anonymous Party website, just to get a better idea of what this whole project is all about. My name is Nick Borden, and I am running for President of the United States. There's a lot more to it than that, so like I said, if you're unfamiliar with what this is all about, please watch one of the introduction videos on the website. The last time on the website's forums, the members chose the topic of removing corruption from the government as the topic for this video. This topic is a little bit harder, and I have no misconceptions or no irrational beliefs regarding this issue, but I do fully understand that evil men will always seek power and seek to corrupt those who are in power. I don't believe even for a second that all corruption could ever be completely removed from government, except possibly after the second coming of Christ. However, I also know that not everyone believes in the Bible, nor do I expect that that belief should have anything to do with this video. It really doesn't. Whether you believe the Bible or not, nothing I do, or nothing I can do, will ever bring about the second coming of Christ. That's on its own timeline, independent of anything that I'm doing. And if you don't believe in the Bible, then you believe it's not coming anyway, so there's not really any point in me basing anything off of that. And there's nothing I can do that could bring about the circumstances that are even illustrated in the book of Revelation anyways, or that portion of the book of Revelations. But what I will be outlining in this video is my plan to eliminate as much corruption as possible, as well as instituting some safeguards to prevent future corruption from surfacing as quickly, and also making corruption easier to spot in the future. The only way that we will be able to keep our government reasonably free from corruption is to remain vigilant. The general public needs to become and remain as educated as possible as to the duties and acceptable uses of power for as many elected positions as they possibly can be. I actually did have an idea regarding that, but this is something I would personally like to see instituted, but I would never dream of having Congress, the President, or any other agent of government force this on the American people, just present it as an option to them. This would be something that the American people should be allowed to vote on whether or not to institute, but not Congress. This would entail requiring as a prerequisite for voter registration that each potential voter would have to pass a basic government competency test that would demonstrate their understanding of the function of the various branches and offices of our government. This would not be a difficult test, nor a long test, likely nothing that would take any longer than maybe 15 or 20 minutes to take. This would not be a history test, nor would it be partisan in any way, shape, or form. No ideals would be called into question, nothing like that. It would just be questions on the branches of government, the offices, and the duties of the elected officials. There would be no questions concerning the candidates or their policies. Nothing like that. Straight government. That's it. So, obviously, the study guide for this exam should be able to be condensed into a small booklet with no more than 25 pages, written at nothing higher than a 6th grade reading level. The purpose of this measure would be by no means to restrict access to the polls, but to ensure that those who are voting understand what they are voting on to at least some degree. But again, let me reiterate that this is not something that I would want Congress to pass. This is something that I would want the American citizens to decide for themselves that it's a good idea. If anyone feels the need to write an example of this exam so that somebody would, be able to go to the website and look at it. Feel free to email it to me at nickborden@anonymousparty.org, and so long as it meets the requirements, I might just post it on the website. Additionally, if anyone wants to write a study guide, that would also be nice as well. Just make sure that it meets all the requirements and it is understandable at around a 6th grade reading level. And if I like it, if it meets all the requirements without, without obviously trying to shift people towards one political ideal over another. Straight government function, not the ideals. But moving on, since this measure is neither something I would enact, nor is it something that's honestly even highly likely to even pass, regardless of what means it was implemented through, other measures should be taken, can and should be taken, from within Congress to reduce corruption and increase transparency. First and foremost, we need term limits for all federal offices. State offices as well, state and local offices, mayors, everything. I really do think that there should be term limits on all of these, and there are many reasons for this. The most apparent is that the longer a person is in a position of power, the more connections that they establish with those who would seek to corrupt them. Lobbyists often, if not nearly always, fall into this camp. Some of them are doing it intentionally, trying to corrupt politicians, but some definitely are doing it unintentionally, but it still is leading to the same problems. I don't always think that there's necessarily ill intent involved. I'd hate to just throw everybody into that camp, because honestly, I don't really know any lobbyists. I've never, at least not to my knowledge, I've never met one, so it's, I can't really condemn those people right offhand, but I am sure that there's at least a handful of them who are doing it on purpose. I mean, the situation the government's in now, it kind of makes it necessary that that's happened at least a few times. But if you don't understand how Congress and the Senate work, there are various committees that the members of these houses can be on. I mean, there's, I believe, at least 100 different committees. I haven't actually counted them. I don't recall seeing any actual figure for this. I may have and just have forgot it. That stuff happens, I guess. But typically, the most senior members, or those who have been in their offices the longest, they get to be on all the committees that do all the important things, all the things that actually can bring about change, or real beneficial change. But this leaves very few useful options for the senators and congressmen who are in their first terms. This makes it increasingly difficult for these new members to make any significant difference once they make it to Congress or the Senate. But make no mistake, this particular thing, term limits, will be extremely difficult to pass, since we would need majority support in both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. We need majority support in both of those, as well as support from whatever the president is at the time, which, if it's me, then yes, we'd have that support, but if it's anybody else, who knows. But this is why I need two things from all of you who are out there who are paying attention. First, I need many of you to run for offices as either congressmen or senators in your own states. If there are already people running for both of those positions in your particular district, support them. If you can't run, and there are no anonymous party candidates in your area, investigate the Republican, Democrat, or if there are any, other third-party candidates like Libertarians or even Green Party. I think there's even a few others depending on where you're at. But if there are any of these candidates running in your area, look into them, investigate them, and provided that their character doesn't suggest that they would, not follow through on their support. If they'd support this measure, then support them. But term limits have actually been brought up numerous times in the past by both major political parties, usually by whichever of those two has not had control of the Congress for at least the prior 4 years. But this measure has never gotten anywhere because these people don't ever really mean it. They all want to keep their power, and with term limits, that would no longer be possible. They gripe about it publicly to gain attention so that they can regain power, but they have no intention ever of limiting it, because to limit the power of the other party would still limit their own power. The Libertarian Party has supported this legislation for as long as I can remember. And even before I actually became more sympathetic to third-party options, I agreed with them on this position. And I'm sure at least a handful of them probably only support it because they want the power for themselves, and by limiting it for the others, at least it gives them a piece of the pie. But I'm sure some of them just genuinely care about limiting the power of everybody for the same basic reasons that I do. And in that particular area, I would support at least a handful of the Libertarian Party candidates. I don't agree with them on everything, otherwise, like I've said before, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But if they would be our partners in this particular arena, this particular issue, then I would welcome any support that they could throw our way. But I think both us and the Libertarian Party could have a lot to gain from that, and really the American people in general would have a lot to gain from implementing term limits in all these offices. But that being said, I have tremendous respect for George Washington. I may have mentioned him several times in some of the other videos, but our nation's first president is one of the people that I have tremendous admiration for. He set the precedence of all of our presidents only serving 2 terms. It wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt served 4 that anyone served more than 2 terms. And immediately after FDR, Congress passed measures limiting any future presidents to only 2 terms. I would propose a 2-term limit in the Senate, which most of you probably are aware serves 6-year terms, and a 4-term limit for congressmen who serve 2-year terms, which would limit them obviously to 8 years. Additionally, I would support limiting any politician from serving for more than 20 years total, or 4 terms total in any combination of federal positions. The reason I use 20 is if they did 2 terms in the Senate and 2 terms as president, that would be the longest that they could possibly go. So 4 terms is really the only thing I guess I needed to state there, because the most you can get to is 20 with that. But as I've demonstrated, term limits would serve 2 basic functions. First, they would increase the ability of newly elected officials to participate in the important policy making, and they would reduce the tendency of elected officials to establish connections with sources of corruption. This, however, will not sufficiently prevent corruption. After all, the campaign process still enables corruption of candidates before they're ever even elected to anything. Granted, what I've outlined so far will help, but it's not enough. There's still more that can be done to stem the growth of corruption, or expansion of corruption, or existence of it in general. But so how do we address the campaign corruption factor? Well, the vast majority of this corruption comes through the campaign funding. In order to raise money, candidates have to get donations to run their campaigns. Most of them spend millions and millions of dollars convincing America to pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars to run the country. This kind of seems like a waste of America's money, doesn't it? At least it does to me. But often this money comes from companies and special interest groups more so than it does individuals. Now granted, individuals will contribute money to the special interest groups, which will then contribute the money to the candidates. But once that person's elected to office, that company or that special interest group often expects legislation to be enacted or policies to be put into place that would benefit that person or that group's interests. This isn't always a bad thing. It kind of depends on what that interest is. if the special interest group is focused on preserving or restoring a constitutional freedom, then I wouldn't see that as a bad thing. But that's not always the case. In fact, I wouldn't even say it was even close to a even slight majority. But if the group seeks to restrict freedom in any way alter the playing field of economics in any way to benefit themselves unfairly, then obviously this is a bad thing. This is where I actually have the serious problem with this issue. So by removing the whole campaign contribution factor altogether, that would restrict the influence of special interest groups and businesses to merely stating their case or raising issues, or raising awareness of issues rather, and possibly gathering signatures for petitions to their government representatives. If that's all they're capable of doing, then they're doing what the people and organizations are supposed to be able to do anyways. Petitions are a different thing than essentially bribery. Your voice should be heard, not your dollars. That's probably the single biggest problem I have with American politics, is dollars speak louder than words. So, I would eliminate the practice of campaign funding. If you want to run for an office, you should be able to sign up on a federal website for federal offices, or on a state website for your state's offices. This should get you placed as a valid write-in candidate at the very least. If your state or the federal government had other requirements in order to have your name appear on the ballots, like actually appear on the ballot as an option rather than just a write-in candidate, that's reasonable, but they should be fair requirements and not necessarily money-based. But the website registration, once you put your name in and other information so they at least knew who you were, that would prompt them to do at least a very brief investigation into whether or not you qualify for the position, based on your birth date. Are you old enough, and are you a citizen of that state? How long have you been a citizen of that state? How long have you lived at your current address? Whatever the requirements are for whatever office it is. If you don't meet those requirements, then obviously it should kick you back off and you're no longer an eligible write-in candidate. Why should we vote somebody in who's not a valid candidate? But provided that you do meet those requirements, you would then be a valid, at least write-in candidate. No campaign funding required, no fee, except possibly a fee that I would probably tie to around, say, 1 hour's wages at the federal minimum wage, which I believe currently is $7.25, unless it has gone up. I know they voted to increase it, but I don't remember when that increase actually takes place. So, but let's just say that was right now, and that right now is still $7.25. If it was a $7.25 fee to register your name on there, that's a reasonable fee. Having a fee is not a bad idea, because any fee, even as low as $1, is going to drastically reduce what I would call prank submissions, where someone would just sign up, oh hey, they're drunk with their buddies and they're like, oh, I'm going to sign up to run for mayor. Something stupid like that, because people will do that, but if there's at least a price involved with it, it'll drastically reduce those. Not to mention, it'll also keep people from signing up other people to some degree. But by keeping the price very low, something that anybody with a job can afford, then you've made it so that anyone who has made it a priority in their life to actually try to run for an office, regardless of their economic status, they still have the ability to do that as long as they've at least put a tiny bit of effort into it. And I think a tiny bit of effort is not too much to ask. It'll probably take more than a tiny bit of effort to actually get elected in most cases, but I do definitely think that tying that fee to a number that fluctuates somewhat with the economy is necessary. And this is something it's actually kind of a tie-in to another particular part of my anti-corruption thing. If we begin to tie budget things to numbers that fluctuate with the economy, then that'll expose any of these debates on raising the price of whatever, raising the minimum wage, whatever it is. It'll expose those as political ploys that they're usually used as, rather than just an occasional necessity. Like we have these frequent debates on the debt ceiling, right? Honestly, that should never even be an issue. We shouldn't have debt growing that fast anyways. The fact that our government is that big that they're spending that ridiculously awful amount of money, that says way more about anything than the fact that we have these debates. The fact that we need these debates on raising the debt ceiling is a bigger issue, I think. But most of these debates on raising funding for this bureau or that bureau, or raising the price of this or raising the cost of that, it's all a political ploy made so that one party can make another party look like the bad guys. It's idiotic. It's just these political games that they play. It drives me nuts. Moving on, I recommend tying nearly every fee, salary, or expense in some way as a ratio to either the federal minimum wage or the average personal annual income. I actually favor the second one, the average personal annual income, to the first, because the first one is something that they vote on frequently. So if they voted on that, then it would change a lot of other fees every time they voted to raise the minimum wage. But at least with that one, it still goes up in relation to something that even the poorest of Americans can generally afford. At least almost poorest of Americans can generally afford. So rather than paying congressmen a flat $170,000 a year, I would propose, this would probably take a constitutional amendment, because the way it's written right now, their salaries cannot increase during their elected term, or, well, be increased or diminished during their elected term. I think it would require a constitutional amendment, I think, because that would essentially change that, but it would change it in a way that the rate, I don't think the ratio could change, but anyways, rather than paying the congressman $170,000 a year, which I think is what they get paid right now. I should probably have looked up the chart before I wrote this video's speech, but it's somewhere right around there, I believe. But I would propose, rather than doing that, paying them 4 times the federal average personal income. Senators, I would propose 5 times the average personal income, and the president 8 times. This would actually be, currently at least, a slight pay cut for the president, but I couldn't bring myself to say 10, which would actually be a slight raise, and 9 just seemed like a strange number, and is actually probably right about what the president makes. But I would, though, keep the extra $50,000 expense allowance for the president, but I would probably tie that to the average personal income as well. I'd probably make it a 1-for-1, which would cut that by a few $1,000s. But I would encourage states to use a similar formula, only tying it to the average in their own state. I don't see a problem with the president making more than the average American. I mean, his job is harder than the average American's, or at least the importance of his decision-making is considerably higher than the decision-making of, say, your average forklift operator, who only has maybe a handful of people's lives could possibly be affected in his decision-making, in a forklift operator's decision-making process. So, paying most of these federal government, elected government officials considerably more isn't necessarily a bad idea, but well, the main reason that I want to tie it to these is so that it never again has to be voted on how much they're making. Their raises will just kind of be automatic with the growth of the economy. Almost as importantly is the why. No matter who they are, their salary would then be dependent on the economy doing well. The better the economy does, the more they make. If they screw up the economy, then they screw up their own paycheck as well. But better yet, this even requires some teamwork in regards to getting the economy on track. So, that would make it so that everyone makes more money. Why should Congress, or the president, your governor, or your mayor, why should they make why should they make the same amount of money, regardless of whether or not you and everyone else that you know are suffering because of an economic slump? An economic slump that, more likely than not, their policies help to create. I might even go so far as to suggest that every government job be tied in some way to the national average personal income. Now, I'm not sure every government employee would at least immediately be in favor of supporting this, because using this policy would actually kind of introduce a little less stability into their paychecks, because if it's tied to this average and the government hits a slump, well, they're going to get a pay cut. And I don't know anybody who wants a pay cut, so I don't think that, I'm not entirely sure that most government employees would be right on board with this, but I would like to point out that this would likely work in their favor. So long as as their current rate of pay, if you were to figure out exactly what it is, or it would convert to, like, let's say they're making $100,000 a year, and that the national average is $50,000 a year. Well, that's an easy calculation. So their pay would then be changed from $100,000 a year to 2 times the national personal average, which, if the national personal average is $50,000 a year, multiply that by 2, you get their salary. Now, I wouldn't recommend making that a normal government salary. Now, there are certainly people in government jobs who deserve that sort of income. There are very important jobs, even non-elected positions, who that is a very reasonable pay rate for, but not all of them. But basically, if you just convert it so that they're making the same amount of money immediately after that as they were before, then I think it's going to work out to their favor. Because everyone in the government, well, first thing, I skipped a point there. Rather than having to negotiate raises or petition for raises or whatever in the future, their raises would be automatic. They would, as the economy grows, so does their check. And since everyone in government would essentially be forced onto the same economic team, it would likely result in a speedier economic growth. And more economic growth means more raises for everyone. My last measure, though, is, I guess, kind of slightly two-part thing, but every government office, it's like the president, the mayor, the governor, whatever, every office must publish weekly every change it has made to policy, every expense signed off on, including budgets, special projects, or anything paid for, even with their expense accounts or allowances that are tied to that office. So if the president spends $50,000 on new china for the dining room at the White House, the people should be able to see that published in that weekly expense summary. So they'd be like, oh, well, the president spent $50,000 on china for the White House. And, you know, then they can criticize or praise him as needed or as desired. And the record that would essentially then be assembled through this, which should all be available on websites that everybody has access to. Everybody knows where they're at. I mean, anybody that cares at least should be able to find out easily where they're at. It shouldn't be that difficult to find out. I mean, it's not anything that people from other countries would find as sensitive information in most cases. Now, there are a few things that I understand that it's not like we want our enemies to know about, so it's not like you're going to publish everything, but if you're going to approve a budget for the military, then if the military gets to decide within themselves how all of that money is spent, then that's one thing. But if you are saying, oh well, we want 50 million of this to go towards, you know, this model of tank, and $80 million of this budget to go towards Harrier jets, or whatever it is that you're trying to send the money towards, if the federal government is voting or deciding in any way, shape, or form on what the money is spent on, then it should go into that report. But if the military themselves gets to decide, well, that's a different thing entirely. The only stuff that is absolutely essential to leave out is anything that is absolutely necessary for the safety and security of those government officials. Like, say, like the flight plan of Air Force One. As someone seeking the office of president, as president, I would not want anyone to know ahead of time the flight plan of Air Force One, because I, like most of the rest of you, would rather, you know, not be shot out of the sky. And there are people who would seek to do that. So by publishing the flight plan of the plane that I was on, I would be increasing the likelihood that that plane would be shot out of the air. So publishing its flight plan, you know, a couple weeks later, after its flight plan has already been executed, is one thing, but ahead of time, no. It's very reasonable that the government would keep something like that a secret. So there are things that I don't think the government should have to disclose, especially before they do it, but that's certainly a very narrow amount of things that I believe that the government should be able to keep from the people. But additionally, every single new law must be published. That's made available for everybody to read before Congress votes on it. And there's a formula that I came up with for how long it must be published prior to that voting. And that is that it must be given at least 1 week for every 1,000 pages at a size 12 font, and always rounding up to the next 1,000 pages. So if it's 100 pages long, you get a week. If it's 1,100 pages long, you get 2 weeks. If it's 2,001 pages, you get 3 weeks. So Obamacare, we would have had dang near a year to read, or maybe more. I don't remember. For some reason 37,000 pages comes to mind on that one, and I might be getting that from somewhere else, but that would have given us plenty of time for those who have the stomachs to read that kind of stuff, which is definitely... I don't know that I could read a 37,000 page bill, and I really doubt that there's any single person who has, but for those with a stomach to read that kind of stuff, that would give them the time to do it. But just as important, they also, whatever senator or congressman is presenting this bill, they must provide an honest and sufficient layman's description of the bill, which is a very, a short and condensed and average person description that can be read. That basically is designed to give the general public the gist of what the law is trying to accomplish. The waiting period, so many weeks per 1,000 pages, that is to determine if that layman's description is honest or not. Any representative who writes a misleading or insufficient layman's description would then be found in contempt of Congress, or removed from their office, or at a minimum fined up to 1/4 of his annual salary, and depending on whether it's found in contempt of Congress, removed from their office, or just a fine, and how much of the fine, depends on the severity of the discrepancy and whether or not it's determined that it was intentional. Now, regardless of whether it was intentional or not, a minimum fine of 2% of that representative's annual salary, I think, is necessary as a deterrent to allowing negligent errors in publishing these layman's descriptions. They should be very representative of what the bill is trying to accomplish. They should say, in layman's terms, what they are trying to do. And if they're found lying or, mistranslating what their bill is saying, then they need to be punished, and that 2% fee would encourage them not to make mistakes. And if they had one of their staffers take care of it for them, guess what? If a staffer makes a mistake that costs me 2% of my annual salary, guess what? That staffer, they're going to go find a new job somewhere else. So when you're responsible for the American people, when you're making laws that affect 300 and something million people, you need to know what you're doing. You can't just float your way through that whole thing. You can't vote on a bill and not know what it says. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call out Nancy Pelosi on this one, but we got to pass it to find out what's in it. That is just about the most idiotic statement I think I have ever heard in my entire life. You do not do that kind of stuff. That's like saying we got to eat this food to find out whether or not it's poisonous. I honest to God, I can't understand how Congress was that stupid to pass that in the first place, especially with that statement having been said. And I still don't understand how that woman continues to get elected. I have a few suspicions, but that's another discussion entirely. But anyway, to summarize the whole gist of this video, I guess, we need term limits, drastic restrictions on campaign contributions, possibly even to the extent of eliminating them altogether, tying regularly occurring expenses such as departmental budgets and government salaries to a figure that fluctuates based on the economy, and requiring delays to review all bills to enable and ensure that they can be read before they are passed, as well as honest layman's descriptions with minimum penalties for errors regardless of the reason, and, if the general population would support it, a measure that would require testing a person's knowledge of basic government function in order to vote. And again, I do understand that we can never fully remove or prevent corruption, but I do believe that with these measures we can come significantly closer. The government was originally laid out the way that it was in order to separate power, to restrict it so that no one person or group of people had too much power. Well, what I'm trying to do is just carrying that spirit just a little further by not just limiting the amount of power per person, but limiting the amount of time a person can wield that power. George Washington relinquished the power bestowed upon him by refusing a third term. They wanted him to keep serving. I think that he turned it down less so because he was afraid of himself becoming corrupt, but more to set a precedence. He could have continued to serve, and he probably would have done just a fine job of it, possibly better than anyone else could have, till the day he died. But that would have set a different precedence, one that I think he had the foresight to avoid. Our nation may have gone downhill much faster after his death if he had remained president up to then. But he had the foresight to limit his own term in that power. That's all I got for this video, and hopefully most of you see the value in the changes that I'm proposing. If any of you have any more ideas, I'd love to hear them. And also, forgive me if I might seem a little bit critical of some of your ideas. I like to run every idea through what I like to call the Freedom Gauntlet, which essentially is if it restricts the power of government to only what government absolutely should have the power to do, that's good. If it enables more freedom for the general public, that's good. That's probably the right answer. But if it does the opposite, then I'm afraid I just can't support that. But for more information, to talk to me, ask me questions, or ask questions to any of the other party members who might be on the website, to make suggestions or whatever else comes to mind, please visit the website www.anonymousparty.org and sign up for the web forum. Also on the site are all of the videos which can be viewed or downloaded And yes, you may repost any of them that you wish to spread the word. I just ask that preferably you don't monetize them. I have chosen not to monetize the videos on the Anonymous Party forum. I could have done it as like a campaign fund thing to pay for the website or something, but I didn't want to invite any possible venue for corruption to find its way into my campaign, nor did I want to to do anything that would enable the existing government to try to accuse me of using it for monetary gain for myself. I have not made a single cent off of this campaign. I have not raised or taken in a single dollar, a single cent, nothing. The only thing that I have gotten from you is support and ideas, and in some cases criticisms, and I guess even in a few cases some insults. And you know what? I expected them all. I'm more grateful for the support and the constructive criticisms than I am the criticisms and the insults, naturally, but I do appreciate those of you who are especially supportive, and I ask that you please keep watching and whenever possible spread the word. But till next time, keep watching, stay vigilant, stay positive, and above all, never forget that the government's power is derived from its people, and that you are the people.